Two of history's most powerful civilizations each answered the same question. What happens after death? One weighed the human heart against a feather. The other placed the soul before the judgment of God. Both even spoke of a second death, yet what they meant could not be more different. This is Egypt's Duat against the Bible's heaven and hell, and to understand either, we begin where every human story ends. Every culture has faced the silence of the grave, yet few built such elaborate maps of the afterlife as ancient Egypt and the biblical world. Rather than leaving what follows death to vague speculation, both traditions structured the post-mortem experience with striking precision. For the Egyptians, this meant traversing a treacherous, multi-layered underworld known as the Duat. In the biblical tradition, particularly through its later developments and Christian theology, the focus shifted to a singular, definitive resurrection and a final divine judgment. While both systems insist that earthly morality dictates eternal destiny, their visions of how this reckoning unfolds and what ultimately becomes of the human soul diverge in ways that reveal two fundamentally different understandings of cosmic justice. For the ancient Egyptians, the transition at death was not an immediate arrival at a final resting place, but the beginning of a perilous journey through the Duat, a structured underworld overseen by Osiris. This subterranean realm was populated by hostile deities, roaring fires, and gatekeepers demanding specific, secret knowledge. To safely navigate these hazards, the deceased relied on Anubis, the jackal-headed guide of the dead, and an arsenal of protective spells. These sacred texts evolved over millennia, moving from the royal pyramid texts carved into stone to the coffin texts of the Middle Kingdom, and later to the personalized papyrus scrolls known today as the Book of the Dead. Survival in this treacherous environment required the absolute preservation of the physical body. Through the meticulous process of mummification, the Egyptians ensured that the various elements of the human identity could endure. These components included the Ka, the vital life force requiring physical sustenance, the Bei, the bird-like personality that flew between the tomb and the underworld, and the Ich, the transfigured immortal spirit that hoped to join the gods. Without a preserved corpse as an anchor, these spiritual forces would perish, causing a permanent death before the soul could even reach the final hall of judgment. Those souls who survive the perils of the Duat eventually stand in the hall of truth for their decisive moral test. Recorded in spell 125 of the Papyrus of Ani, this trial is not an abstract evaluation, but a literal, physical weighing of a lifetime's deeds. Before the enthroned Osiris, the jackal-headed god Anubis places the deceased's heart onto one pan of a massive scale. On the opposing pan lies the ostrich feather of Me'at, the goddess representing cosmic order, truth, and justice. The ibis-headed scribe Thoth stands ready with his palette to record the verdict. If the scales balance perfectly, proving a life lived in harmony with cosmic law, the soul is declared true of voice. But beside the balance waits Ammit, a hybrid beast with the head of a crocodile, waiting to consume any heart weighed down by sin. If the scales balance, the deceased passes into Aru, the field of reeds. This paradise is a perfected mirror of Egypt itself, where the Nile never floods destructively and crops grow in perpetual abundance. Here the soul is reunited with lost family members, fishing, farming, and living in peace under the watch of Osiris. But for those whose hearts fail the trial, no such eternity exists. Ammit devours the heavy heart, inflicting what ancient texts term the second death. In the Egyptian tradition, this second death does not lead to a place of unending torture or conscious pain. Instead, it means absolute annihilation. The unworthy soul simply ceases to exist, completely erased from the cosmos, denied any memory or hope of rebirth. The oldest texts of the Hebrew Bible present a different view of the afterlife, centered on a place called Sheol. In Job, Ecclesiastes, and the Psalms, Sheol is a silent, shadowy underworld of dust and darkness. Psalm 6, verse 5, and Ecclesiastes 9, verse 10 describe it as a quiet destination where both the righteous and the wicked go at death, separated from active relationship with the living and with God. In this early stage, Sheol represents the common grave of humanity, devoid of torment or reward. This uniform picture shifted during the Second Temple period from the 6th century BCE to the 1st century CE. During this era of political upheaval, Jewish writers began to articulate expectations of bodily resurrection and final reckoning. The book of Daniel, chapter 12, contains one of the earliest explicit biblical references to this, declaring that many who sleep in the dust will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame. Martyr narratives in 2 Maccabees, chapter 7, the apocalyptic visions of 1st Enoch, and Dead Sea Scroll fragments show a developing belief that God would physically raise the dead to vindicate the righteous. This evolution was not met with universal agreement. Sectarian divisions over the afterlife were prominent. The Book of Acts and the historian Josephus record that while the Pharisees defended the resurrection of the dead, the Sadducees rejected it entirely. Scholars debate the catalysts behind these frameworks. Some propose that contact with Persian Zoroastrianism or Greek Hellenistic philosophy introduced concepts of cosmic dualism and the immortal soul, while other researchers argue these ideas grew organically from internal Jewish theological reflection under persecution. By the New Testament era, the expectation of resurrection and final divine sorting was central to Christian teaching. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the Apostle Paul provides a theological defense of a physical, bodily resurrection. This framework establishes that at the end of history, the dead will be raised, and God will separate the righteous from the wicked based on how they lived and believed. While the final destinations differ from the Egyptian model, both traditions share a core conviction that earthly moral choices carry eternal consequences. For the righteous, the biblical promise is heaven, conceived not as a distant, disembodied escape, but as eternal life in the direct presence of God. In the final chapters of the book of Revelation, this destination is pictured as a new heaven and a new earth, culminating in the descent of the New Jerusalem. This radiant, jewel-like city represents a renewed creation where the physical and spiritual worlds unite. It is characterized by peace, reunion, and freedom from death, suffering, and sorrow. While some traditions interpret these descriptions literally, and others read them as symbolic, both agree on the core promise, an eternity spent in unmediated communion with the Creator. The alternative biblical destination is framed as a solemn warning. The New Testament frequently uses the term Gehenna, referring to the Valley of Hinnom, a physical ravine outside Jerusalem, historically associated with child sacrifice and burning waste. In the teachings of Jesus, this smoldering valley became a vivid image of divine judgment. The book of Revelation later introduces the lake of fire, calling it the second death. How Christian traditions interpret these passages varies. The historic majority view understands hell as eternal conscious separation from God. However, a significant theological minority defends annihilationism, the belief that the wicked are ultimately destroyed, ceasing to exist entirely. This doctrinal distinction remains actively debated among scholars and denominations. These two ancient systems share striking parallels. Both demand a moral reckoning, promise paradise, and warn of a second death. Yet their paths to eternity diverge sharply. Egypt's model relies on physical preservation and sacred spells to traverse the subterranean underworld, resulting in either a peaceful eternity or absolute annihilation. The biblical tradition instead centers on a bodily resurrection and final divine judgment, warning of enduring separation or absolute destruction. Ultimately, this leaves two distinct images of eternal cosmic justice: a heart balanced against a feather in the hall of truth, and a single human soul standing directly before God. Today, these civilizations still shape how we confront mortality. Offered for historical education, this comparison respects all faiths and their diverse interpretations, claiming no theological truth. Ultimately, our shared search for final justice and meaning endures. Join the conversation in the comments.